If you move to another country or even just travel overseas, people are bound to ask you where you're from. And why not? It's a natural icebreaker. But if you're from the US, that simple question can turn into a cultural minefield. Here's why. If you've grown up here, you're probably used to thinking of yourself as an American. And chances are you're proud of that. And I am not here to change your mind. And if the people you're talking to are European, for example, they're probably going to be okay with you calling yourself American, because quite honestly, that's how most of them refer to us too. In fact, a lot of grocery stores in Europe even have American food aisles full of products I've never actually seen in the US. I mean, seriously, wieners in a jar? That's just un-American. See? I just did it. I said un-American when what I really meant was unlike the United States of America. Now that might sound like a minor distinction, but not if you ask the 1 billion other people who also live in the Americas. And no, they're not just being sensitive. There's a whole history behind why this matters. Let's dig into it. Geography only scratches the surface, but it's a good place to start. We're used to thinking of America as shorthand for the United States, but the term actually covers a lot more ground. There's North America, Central America, and South America, and that means Mexicans, Costa Ricans, Brazilians, Chileans, Canadians. They're all Americans too. So when we refer to ourselves as Americans, it's kind of like showing up at a Smith family reunion and introducing yourself to everybody as Smith, as if you're the only one. Now let's talk about why this hits a nerve. First, we've got the colonial roots. The name America, as you probably know, comes from Amerigo Vespucci, a European explorer. So right out of the gate, the name has a built-in colonial origin, and that gets us a little closer to the heart of the matter. Because the Europeans didn't exactly come bearing gifts, they came to take. And what they took, they often took by force through violence, exploitation, and displacement. And all that continued under colonial occupation in the form of slavery. The people who made up the enslaved population included both the Native Americans and the Africans who were brought over and who still make up over 20% of the population of Latin America in general. Now you might be wondering what all this has to do with the United States. I mean, if European countries like Spain and Portugal were looting South America, while the English were doing the same in North America, where does all this Latin American resentment come from? Aren't we talking about two separate histories? Turns out, not really. In 1823, the U.S. issued the Monroe Doctrine, basically telling European powers to keep their hands off the Americas. On the surface, it sounded like protection, like, hey, Latin America, we've got your back. But the way it turned out in real life was more like, this is our backyard now. And once we started thinking of it as our backyard, the U.S. started treating it like a warehouse that we could go into whenever we wanted, dropping in as and when to grab resources, protect business interests, swap out a few leaders, or, rearrange the furniture. That doctrine was used to justify all kinds of intervention, military and otherwise, in countries like Chile, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Panama, just to name a few. In The Open Veins of Latin America, Uruguayan author Eduardo Galeano boiled it down like this. Our defeat was always implicit in the victory of others, and our wealth has always generated poverty by nourishing the prosperity of others. So I think you can start to see that when someone from the US casually calls themselves American, it can sound like just another chapter in a long history of us taking more than our share, not just politically or economically, but even linguistically. Like, wow, we even took the continent's name for ourselves. Then when you add in US dominance, not only in politics, but in media and culture too, it starts to feel like the US has claimed not only the name, but the narrative as well. I mean, our movies, music, brands, news outlets, even our slang are everywhere. From Hollywood to Halloween to the Americanization of Santa Claus and the global presence of our fast food chains and CNN, you almost can't get away from it. So when we also claim the name of both Western continents, like I just did. Damn, it's hard to stay on top of this thing. That branding can feel like just one more way the U.S. is taking up more than its fair share of the space. Some Latin American intellectuals have described this far better than I ever could. For example, in speaking on how U.S. media saturates Latin culture, Uruguayan artist Sebastián Santana said, "It's hard to tell your own story when someone else's is playing on every screen." If you've ever been in a conversation with someone who tends to make everything about themselves, then you begin to get a sense of what they might be feeling. And Mexican journalist and activist Jorge Ramos adds this: "The United States exports its own values through TV shows and movies, but it rarely imports ours." And I know that to be true from my own personal experience. When I lived in Mexico, I was used to being able to watch not only Mexican TV and films, but all the shows from the States and tons of movies from all over the world. And then when I came back to the States to visit, I was kind of shocked that even cable didn't offer much in the way of foreign films. I hadn't realized before how insulated we tend to be against other points of view. But anyway, here's where it gets tricky for us as expats. I get it. I really do. I understand the objections, and I do try to be sensitive. But the constant reminders can be exhausting. I mean, it's not like we as individuals are all walking around actively trying to erase other cultures. We just don't really have a name for ourselves. I mean, the United States of America is a mouthful. And one of the only other countries in the world with a similar name is Mexico, whose full name is the United Mexican States, or sometimes the United States of Mexico. Bet you didn't know that. Because everybody just calls it Mexico. But when we shorten our name to America, suddenly we're carrying the weight of every U.S. military intervention since 1898. Think about that. And here's the kicker. Even when I avoid calling myself American and say I'm from the U.S. or from the States, I've still ended up on the receiving end of passionate monologues about U.S. imperialism. So yeah, not always easy to avoid politics, even in casual social settings. So what's the solution? They do have a word to describe us in Spanish, and no, I don't mean gringo. It's estadounidense. That means United Statesian. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? Others call us Norteamericanos, which translates to North Americans. But that kind of leaves out Canada and Mexico. So what do we do instead? One workaround I found is to be more specific. So rather than saying I'm American, I'll say something like I'm from Denver, Colorado. And that can sometimes spark genuine curiosity and almost always leads to better conversations. Because I think that for a lot of people, responding to that American label has gotten to be almost a knee-jerk reaction. And while they've got legitimate gripes with U.S. foreign policy over the years, they really don't have anything against Denver or Chicago. Of course, if you've moved around a lot like I have, this isn't always easy. I've had those moments where I wasn't sure what to say because I didn't really feel like I was from anywhere. But hey, at least we're trying, and sometimes that little bit of effort can go a long way. And in the end, it comes down to awareness. Because like it or not, when we venture abroad, we become unofficial representatives of our country. And the name that we use to describe where we're from comes with a whole lot of historical baggage. It's not just about a word. It's about history, identity, and emotion. And if it feels like people are being overly sensitive, it might be worth remembering that we've had the luxury of not having to think about it. But when we're away from our home, we're the guest in someone else's home. And that means stepping into someone else's story and realizing that our version of the world isn't the only one that matters. So I'm curious, how do you handle this? Do you say American? Do you avoid saying it? Have you had conversations that went sideways because of this? Let me know in the comments, and if the question, where are you from, fills you with anxiety like it does me, you want to check back later because that's what we're diving into next time. Until then, have fun exploring, and remember, every place has its own story. Listen for it.